And I'd had successes and I've had failures, and I've swapped arrow types that I've shot like 15 times and that type of thing. So just kind of your standard good old bow hunter. But I just became fascinated with wanting to know more and kind of unveil some of these GPS color study type of myths and things that people they think they understand, but we could really understand them if we could actually just visually see what the deer are doing in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of the first time that's ever been done.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Derrick Dixon from Whitetail Research. Unless you guys have been living under a rock, you've definitely probably seen one of this guy's videos in the last month and a half. So how's it going, man? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so what, maybe this is I think they call them industry plants in like the rap world, but people coming out of nowhere, posting stuff, blowing up. Like
Yeah.
what's life been like recently, on this climb you've been on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't expect for the channel to do what it did. I think that the very first night that I posted a video, I posted it and it was like 6 p.m. and then it rolled into that evening and I had like 15 subscribers and I don't know, the video had 88 views or something, 105 views. And I remember laying down with my wife and I was like, you know what? I think this YouTube thing is going to be a little more difficult than I thought. Like I thought I was pretty good at mixing video and audio engineering and all these different things, but it's just kind of tough. Like YouTube, first of all, has to just show your video out there. So, and when I laid down, I thought to myself, if like 10 hunters can just find this video, it's going to do something. Like they're going to share it with their friends. Like surely this video is better than I think it is. And then I woke up the next morning and it had like 400 and something views and it had 10 comments from actual hunters. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
running back into the bedroom where my wife was, and I was just screaming at her, like, "Look, people actually found the video, and it might
Yeah.
do something." And it obviously did. I mean, it blew up pretty well. So, yeah, no, from that perspective, it's been pretty crazy. And my phone's been a very unpleasant place to be with
Yeah.
how many emails and stuff I get. But ultimately, I mean, it's super super fun. I mean, I couldn't have wished for anything more than what's happened.
Yeah, man. No, it's been cool to see, and I think it's an instant hit. I think people really like the format, the editing style, super fast paced and fun and informative.
Yeah.
Not too serious, which I think a lot of us can appreciate. So, did you have any background in this, like video editing, like putting audio together, like any of that stuff? It seems like you're a little too good out of the gate to not have done this before.
Yeah, no, I think that part of that shows with how much research I did going into it and how much time I spent working on my craft before I ever posted my first video. That's why you guys see a lot of video footage from last season. There were a lot of time frames when I was doing the research live where I had thought about making content off of that. And there's a ton of footage that I have on a hard drive of me walking around and talking to a camera and like kind of dreaming and trying to picture out what my first video was going to be, but I just kept waiting on it because in the end, the style of things that I was going for, I never really liked it. And yeah, in terms of kind of like my background and how I got into it all, in 2019, I dropped out of college and picked up a really, really good technology job at a private school in a bigger city. So away from all of the farmland and everything like that to be able to hunt and kind of live your dream in that realm. And I'd worked there for quite a while, and simultaneously in 2019, I also got married. So I was married, had a brand new tech job. It was paying the bills, very comfortable, and I'd gotten into drones, and kind of probably a little bit earlier than that, I was into wildlife photography, really big. I'd bought some really nice Sony cameras, and I had their 200 to 600 and some primes, and I just really enjoyed going out and taking pictures of, in general, wildlife and nature, and really kind of focusing on whitetail deer though. And in 2019, I got into drones a little bit more. I'd purchased a DJI Inspire, I believe it was, and
Hmm.
I'd noticed that the DJI Inspire, you could purchase a thermal camera attachment for it and put it on. And whenever I saw that, the first thing that clicked in my brain was you could see deer with that. Like I'm pretty positive you could actually observe some whitetail deer with this thing and maybe see where they are and kind of where they're bedding and prove some of these myths and all the campfire stories potentially true or false. And I couldn't afford that camera at all. It was way too expensive, and I just got a new job, just got married, so it's it. But initially, though, that kind of planted the seed. Like that was initially where I'd realized like you could see deer with a drone, period. That's about the end of that thought. And then fast forward 2022, the DJI Matrice 30T had come out, and I was just like, whoa, that thing can do everything I'd ever dreamed of, and actually potentially a little bit more. And you could drop pins as if you were doing a GPS color study simultaneously while flying. You had a zoom camera for kind of cinematic shots and just getting in tight to identify the animals. And then you had the thermal camera, wide camera for more cinematic shots as well. And it was like this cinematographer, thermal drone researching drone, like just machine. And you could fly it in all weather. You could fly it in rain, snow, ice. I've flown it 40-mile-per-hour winds before whenever it was snowing, just straight blowing sideways that day. And yeah, I mean, it's just a beast of a drone. And also, though, it was really expensive. I remember going home and kind of telling my wife, like, nothing will stop me from owning this drone. Like, if I have to sell my truck, I will sell my truck. If I have to sell your car, I'm going to sell the car. Like, I'll ride a bike to work every day. You can stay unemployed and like doing photography. She was a photographer as well. And so she stayed home a lot. And then a month or two later, that was whenever things had set in that, oh, our first kid, we were going to have our first kid. And so DJI Matrice 30T kind of out the window, and depression starts setting in. It's like I'm never gonna get to follow my dream now. Stinking kids, and that was
I've got one. I know.
Yeah, I love my son. But and then in 2024, fast forward, my boss had came up to me one day and was like, "Hey man, I just noticing that you're not clicking like fully." And I wasn't fulfilling my job role. I was kind of showing signs of like pretty deep depression because I was really wanting to get outside and do all these things that I always dreamed of, but I just didn't have the time and I wasn't able to. And now I had a kid, now I had a wife and all these responsibilities and looking to buy a house, and housing market's ridiculous and I can't afford anything. And all that's happening. And that was kind of the end of our conversation. Like we just ended on a note like, okay, there is something going on, and he was going to try to help me out. And then we'd gotten home with our second kid, and I left on paternity leave. And whenever we walked in the door, not 3 hours later, I don't know how he knew we were home. He called me and he was like, "Hey man," and he asked me about the kid and how everything had went, and we talked for a while just as friends, but I could tell there was like a subtle undertone to his voice. And then he was like, "I'm firing you." And I was like, "You're firing, like, you can't like keep me on for like 3 more months or something so I can figure something out?" And he's like, "No man, I'm kicking you off the cliff. Like, go figure it out, go follow your dream. You're fired." And it's just like, oh, okay.
In a
So
kind way, he fired you, or like
oh,
an
in a kind
unkind way?
yeah, no, it
Yeah.
was a kind way. It was like a he knew kind of the dreams that I'd had for whitetail research and purchasing this drone and moving back home and all these things that I'd had in my idea and plan or in my mind and that I planned out. But I just never I became too comfortable in that job that kind of paid the bills, and it was going to be able to afford us a house in an area that I didn't want to live. And I just I wasn't living my life the best way that I possibly could, and he could see that. So in the end, I really thank him for kind of kicking me off of that cliff just so abruptly. And I remember walking to the house though, and I first thing I told my wife was I'm buying the drone, and she just kind of looked at me and was like, okay. And I was like, oh, and by the way, I got fired. And then she's like, whoa, like wait, really, like you got fired?
Hmm.
Let's hit on that a little bit more. So then I told her like, no, we're moving back home, to my hometown, and like I'm going to continue to try to do this whitetail research thing, and we're just going to live off savings and figure it out. I don't know where it's going to go, but surely to goodness, if somebody does this at the level that I'm wanting to take it to, it'll actually take off really well. And so that's whenever I started spurring in like all of my uh, photography skills with cameras, because ultimately, if you were to start asking me about wildlife photography cameras and all of the intricacies that it has, I'm probably smarter in that world than anything. I know I know wildlife photography beyond what people understand. Um, but so I started kind of spurring that into learning the videography side of things as well. And then all the while working the technology job, I got into a lot of audio engineering, audio visual type stuff for live type performance. And I just all the while, and then I also went to a church where I did a lot of live streaming, and I was kind of like kind of leading the push in the live streaming department and running black magic cameras and wireless HDMI transmitters and all this type of stuff. So I'd always had my hand all the way throughout that time frame with cameras and audio and visual, and it just kind of helped hone that craft. So I took all of the knowledge that I'd had, that I'd gained over those 5 years, plus all of my wildlife photography knowledge, and just the general my capabilities of getting sub 30 yards to mature bucks and these types of things, and started applying it towards this dream of whitetail research. And yeah, that's kind of how all of that ended up happening. And then simultaneously, also, I'd been bow hunting all the way throughout that time frame, and I'd had successes and I've had failures, and I've swapped arrow types that I've shot like 15 times and that type of thing. So just kind of your standard good old bow hunter. But I just became fascinated with wanting to know more, and kind of unveil some of these GPS color study type of myths and things that people, they think they understand, but we could really understand them if we could actually just visually see what the deer are doing in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of the first time that's ever been done.
So you got, just to recap this, you got fired and you kind of had a dream to create something like this, and you had enough level of confidence with your skill set that you're like, no, I'm going to try to make this into something
Yeah.
before you
Yeah,
ever
no,
posted your first video.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a full on like American dream type pitch. Like I just kind of put all the eggs in one basket, and it's the fact. And like I said, I'd started working on trying to make a video last season, but I just realized the format at which I was going to do it was not something that I liked yet, and I really felt like I needed to capture all of the research throughout one season prior to ever making a video. I can't get on and talk about what I think I know unless I've actually done the research and analyzed it to the level that I possibly, to the maximum level that I possibly could. So I spent all season researching, and then that's why it took me until June to actually post my first video, because once January 15th hit and season ended, I think I continued to go out and track deer a little bit longer, kind of watching for shed antlers and that type of thing, and into February, and also just observing their general behavior. But it wasn't really applicable for the hunter. That was more just for a research side of things for me. But from that time until June, about June 1st, I spent that entire time frame going back through all of the videos that I'd taken and cleaning up all of the data collection that I'd done, and trying to figure out any other little things that maybe I'd missed whenever I was there in person and I was flying the drone. Rewatching the videos, and because like whenever I was in person, I was documenting pretty basic variables, right? So I would have, whenever I would locate a mature buck in the morning, I would mark him whether he was bedding or moving, and then that would be the start of that day's event. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would capture 25 variables whether he was bedding or moving, and then let's say he was bedding, then as soon as he would get up and move, I would mark the time slot, and then I would capture all 25 variables within that time slot of whenever he was moving, and then whenever he would bed, that's another event. So I'd mark that timestamp, and then he would be bedding, and then there's all those variables. But then after the fact, whenever I watched all the videos back, that's whenever I documented everything. I documented things all the way down to the level of defecation frequency. Like I was documenting every little intricacy, and whenever a mature buck was bedding, if he would stand up and spin his body around, or if he would kind of lift his head and he was paying attention to something, what was causing him to do that type of thing, and that particular behavior. And I was just trying to get as many variables in play as possible, so that way I could potentially automate something out of this sheet that would show me kind of a something that's repetitive happening out of all of this. And I was able to do that with some things. So
Yeah, dude, that's really, really cool. So
yeah.
kind of, I guess, from a high level setting it up, like, where did you do it? How did you think through all of kind of the setup? And like, I guess one of my questions was how you had time to do this all day, but that you already answered that with kind of devoting
Yeah.
yourself fully to it. But how did you kind of set all this up? Like, you have a property that you can study these deer, or do you want to go other places, or like, how did that kind of work?
Yep. So I had multiple properties that I just pre-existingly had access to, whether it was to go out and hunt or just kind of go out and play around on with friends and whatnot. But the main property that people have seen so far, that's one it's co-owned with my family and a couple others. But it's ultimately, I just kind of refer to it as like the family farm. And it's in the end, once everything's kind of pieced together, it's around 1,000 acres, and it's just a really, really fun piece. And there's not a lot of people that hunt around it, but there's a lot of people that do hunt inside of it. So there's a good amount of hunting pressure that takes place on it. And I just felt like for hill country, it was really kind of a good base boundary property. And it's just really cool in terms of its topographical features as well, for here in Missouri. And then one of the other properties that I researched, which hasn't made it onto a video yet, is agriculture property that's not a mile away from this other one, but it's just completely flat. And they have 20-acre soybean fields, and I think this year they had like 25, 30-acre cornfields, and just everything kind of creek bottomish, and there's maybe a little bit of ridge systems on the south side of it where all the deer bed, but you can go out in an evening, like, right, well, just recently we went and scouted it on foot, and there were 150 deer standing in one soybean field. So it's just a completely different demographic of deer versus just a mile away where we have hill country and rough and terrain, and you'll never see 150 deer at one time. And
Hmm.
it's pretty fascinating. And then I have a couple other properties, some ranging from 300 acres. I have a couple that are just little pieces of 40s, and then I have a couple that are really really big, over 5,000 acres. That they're all kind of heavy lease properties, but I just have access to go out and do research on them. So yeah, at some point the channel will start showing other properties. But that was one of the unique things about me, and what made me feel so confident in the fact that I could do this was not only my capabilities that I knew for myself in terms of my videography skills and audio engineering and these types of things, but also it's like I'm going to be able to devote 100% of my time because I just had the savings build up to where I could do that. I mean, and I had like a time allotted. I think in the end it was like a year and a half. And after a year and a half, I would say you're gonna have to figure out something to make a little bit of money,
Yeah.
whether you go and get a part-time job or something. But you have a year and a half to figure something out. And but on top of that, I had access to so much land and that's just a unique thing in itself to be able to go out there and do whatever you want to on these properties and fly them with really no questions asked type situation, and kind of mixing all of these variables together with really the biggest one being time. I just felt like there was no way that I could fail in this particular endeavor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's awesome. That you're right. That is, I hear a bald eagle like screeching when you're saying that. Like, I'm gonna go
Yeah,
for it. Which is, it is the American dream. It's awesome, but it's
yeah.
very interesting, like you said, from the different types of topography or habitat or terrain. We hunt a bunch in eastern Oklahoma and some of the Kiamichi Mountains, Washita Mountains, and like I've always wondered, like lower deer density, it's probably a lot easier to find bucks. You're not combing through a bunch of them, right? And
Hmm.
it would be really interesting to me to like recreate that study where I'm at and learn something versus like agricultural stuff where you're like, all right, I'm picking through 150 deer to find
Yeah,
this one buck. Oh, is that him or is that a different 8 point? Like
yeah, yeah. It's
it's very
probably a
interesting.
different one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, no, I definitely have ideas to go and do different things. In fact, I have some things worked, kind of already kind of working themselves out in the groundwork of it, to go to other states. And one of the biggest things that I would like to also start researching is because I have a lot of hill country, and then I have a lot of kind of a little bit of agriculture. It's not like your standard agriculture. Like if you get out there towards some areas of Iowa and Kansas where there's just not many pockets of trees, that's kind of a different world than where I'm at because there's still big timber around the agriculture that I have. Um, but I'd really like to go and do some swampland as well. So just anything, whether it's you go to Florida or any of these types of lowland type areas, and analyze those as well. Kind of slightly flatter terrain features with just heavy kind of swampland. That'd be a really cool one to look at. But
Oh yeah. So was it hard to, you obviously a devoted bow hunter, but you're also, a tech guy, audio engineer, all these other sorts of things. Was it tough for you to kind of, I believe in your first video, you talked about giving up the majority of your hunting season to follow
yeah,
the deer. Like what was that rationale? And was
yeah,
that
yeah. I
hard
mean,
to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reasoning behind it was because I didn't feel it too ethical to be out flying the drone and then simultaneously hunting and trying to kill, the biggest mature buck on the property at the same
Right.
time. So I still helped manage does across various properties, whether that was with my bow or my rifle. But I wasn't out seeking the big antlers because really, ultimately, I feel like most people wouldn't even care, which I didn't. I didn't do this, but even then, I feel like most people wouldn't even care if I'd flown my drone up, identified a group of does, walked out with my rifle and shot a doe. People just wouldn't care. But if I did so with a 170-inch, borderline Boone and Crockett deer, then all of
Oh
a
yeah.
sudden everyone's got a problem now. And so, but yeah, ultimately I just decided to kind of hang it up in terms of going out and hunting bucks. And that wasn't as difficult as a lot of people would have thought for me. And that's because kind of in that 2021 to 2024 timeframe, whenever I was up working that job, um, I would come down a lot for hunting, and I would continue to kill does and help manage does on the property just for meat because I enjoyed eating venison throughout the season, and I wasn't able to devote myself a lot in that time frame towards hunting mature bucks. But I also simultaneously learned kind of through my grandpa in a way because my grandpa he'd done a lot of research in the past, whether it was with trail cameras and doe to buck analysis and just kind of from the management perspective of things. And one of the things he told me a long time ago was just the fact that in the end, all this work and all this money and all this time that he puts into this, he doesn't care if he kills a big mature buck. He just wants to know that they're out there, and he just
Mhm.
really enjoys seeing them. And that kind of twisted my brain up a little bit because in my brain, it's like at that time frame, he was almost 80 years old. Now he is like 80 years old. And my whole thing in my brain was like, I've killed some big bucks and I was wanting to get him on big bucks, and you would get him in a situation where he's over, just a great food plot and a great situation, or kind of off on the edge of timber somewhere, and he has an interaction with a mature buck, and he just saw him at like 40 to 50 yards and passed him, and it's like, why'd you pass him? Like, what are you
Mhm.
doing? And he's just like, I just enjoyed watching him. And the more I saw that in him, the more I started realizing, like, I kind of see what he's saying. Like, I just enjoy watching him, and that's one of the reasons why I became so fascinated with bow hunting over rifle hunting in the first place. Was rifle hunting, you have 5 second, 10-second interactions, and bow
Yeah.
hunting, you have 30-second. And, in some cases you have a short interaction, but if something runs right up on you, but a lot of the times you're having really long interactions, and a lot of times you're not closing the deal. So you saw a deer and you saw him for 2 minutes. And, in a scenario where you did see a deer for 2 minutes, that's a long time frame. And if you did that, you could probably walk away and tell a story off of that to your friends and family that's like 30 minutes long, just off of that 1 2 minute event. That's how big of an impact it can have on you as a hunter. And that was kind of where I started realizing, like, maybe what if I just set the bow down a little bit more often, and I take my camera and I try to focus on getting, because really with photography you want to get as close as you can. And too close can be too close, like 5 yards is too close, but
Yeah.
you really want to be sub 30 yards in a lot of situations, even with a 600 millimeter lens. So I became really good at getting sub 30 yards to mature bucks with my 600 millimeter lens, and that kind of helped drive that passion for, I just really like getting out there and watching them and observing their behaviors and the way that they hold their head and the way that they interact with other deer around them and the way they kind of push groups of deer around. And I don't know, I just became really fascinated with it. So having that mentality rolling into the drone, and having the drone, and not being able to bow hunt mature bucks, it was already something that I'd already kind of started with the photography side of things. And what I love to, like, every once in a while, I'll see a buck and he's clearly dominant and he's clearly mature, and he could be a 125-inch mainframe gnarled seven or something, just kind of an
Mhm.
ugly old deer. And he's just out there beating the crap out of other deer, kind of stomping them with his feet and just being mean. Whenever I see a situation like that, for some reason I do get like this little prick in the back of my brain, like, gosh, that deer would be fun to hunt. Like he'd be
Yeah.
such a cool
That
deer to
deer needs
chase.
shot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that deer needs shot. Like he'd be really cool. But at the same time, it's like he'd also be really cool to research. Like I had one situation where I hadn't started researching the agriculture property yet, and we had a couple target bucks on the property that my friend was going to be hunting potentially, and it was like, well, we could hunt these deer because I hadn't researched them yet. And I'd learned a lot about mature bucks, and then we were already just good at getting close to deer in general. And it's like, or I could just research them. Where do you draw the line? Like, do I give myself this leniency and go out and hunt this property, and potentially, maybe we get two mature bucks on the ground, or do I just go out and research these deer, and continue to have more stuff to document based off of it? And in the end, I took the latter and I just started researching them. So
You obviously you're taking the drone up and just kind of observing, right? And probably putting a lot of this stuff together as you're observing. But you had to have some sort of goals with the research. So
yeah,
what were your like kind of overall goals? What did you want to learn,
yeah.
with the drone? Is it movement, just overall behavior, how they use topography? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of different things, but high level, what were your kind of goals?
Yeah, well, initially going into it, I had a lot of basic level questions, like, do they actually bed on the leeward side of this ridge? Like all the kind of basic myths and campfire story type things that exist. And, do they walk into the headwind, or do they walk with a crosswind or a tailwind, these types of things. And, I had those in the back of my brain, but really the main goal going into it was I wanted to record as many mature bucks for as much time as possible, and that was about it. Like, I just like, how many mature bucks can I find, and how often can I record every single movement that they do, and I'll just figure it out as I go type situation. So, it took probably a week or so for me to start laying out the groundwork clean a little bit cleaner than what I'd pre-existingly had in terms of what type of data I was wanting to collect. Whether it's ranging from all of this, because I did document all of this, whether it was moon phase data and everything related to moon phase data, and whether or not there's any correlation with that. So far, I haven't seen a correlation. And then the everything related to wind, and then the wind direction, not only of the day that you're researching, but the wind direction of the day prior, the temperatures of the day prior, the temperatures of the day of, whenever the sun rises, whenever the sun sets, like just all these little tiny, if you could think about it, I was trying to write it down. And it took me a while to get that system in place. But once I did, then it was just pretty automated. And I actually automated it a lot because I'm a tech guy. So I know how to automate things. So a lot of the spreadsheet in terms of that, the basic level things that weren't really going to change, I was able to document that automated. And then in terms of in field, I mean, the two easiest things to observe a whitetail do is bed and move. They kind of like do those two things. They're either bedding or they're moving.
What a
And
life. Yeah.
yeah, what a life. And a lot of the time spent is actually bedding. So trying to analyze why they're bedding, where they're bedding, and what they're doing whenever they're bedding, and every once in a while, whenever they bed throughout the middle of the day, why did you decide to get up and move across this draw and bed on the other side of the draw? Or why did you decide to get up and wrap the south side of this ridge and then bed up on the north, or on the south side of this other ridge over here? And trying to piece together midday movements and all these different types of, and in some cases, you'd have one where he'd just get up and spin around and bed back down, and trying to understand why he was doing that. And then obviously you have the movement side of things, where you have the morning movement and then you have the big evening movement. And really, I guess that is another thing that I thought about prior, is I wanted to focus, especially the stuff that I showed on YouTube, all of my efforts in the shooting light hours. I wasn't focusing outside of that. And there is a lot to be learned from a research perspective outside of that range, and kind of what they do at nighttime. And I think that some of it could potentially be applicable for a hunter situation. Like,
Hmm.
say you run trail cameras and you get an evening picture of your deer here. And then is there any way that you can, like, maybe guesstimate where he's moved along that trail? Like, how far can one move from last light at the end of that day and then back to the next morning time frame? In my
Yep.
experience, it's a pretty far movement. But I didn't get out and record that nighttime activity near like I could have. I did it a couple times, but in the end, I mean, I had a wife and two kids, and I was treating it like a job. And in my mindset in the job, it was like, really, this first season's main focus was going to be on daylight hours and making it as applicable for hunters as possible. So that was kind of where I entered with that. I don't remember your question, but hopefully
No,
hopefully I
that
answered some of it. Yeah.
no, yeah. So in the obviously you're wanting to track mature bucks for the most part. Like do you
Yeah.
disregard, like, hey, I think that's a 2-year-old, I think that's a 3-year-old. I'm looking for the maturest buck
Yeah.
on this property. I want to follow his habits because that's what everybody in the woods wants to kill.
Yeah, I didn't disregard them, and I also researched does just a little bit as well. But a lot of the times, whenever I did that, whenever I was researching does or a younger deer, um, it would be whenever I lost the mature buck, or if the mature buck walked out of the area that I could fly. Like, say it's November and there's no way I could lose him because all the leaves are off the trees and I could see everything. If he walks out of my range and I'm going to have to start flying over other people's private property,
Mhm.
technically, from a drone's perspective, that is legal, and I could have flown over their private property because airspace, they don't own the airspace. But I also don't want to get my really expensive drone shot out of the sky, which I would fully
There's some
understand if some.
people that would do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, especially where I'm at. So
Yeah.
I stayed in my own airspace that I don't own, right above the properties that I was flying. And so if he walked off the property, I could watch him for quite a long time with the zoom camera. But at some point, he would get to where that that cross shot is shooting through so many trees that I'm not able to gain much more intel. So in that scenario, then I would kind of back off of him, go and try and find another mature buck on the property, or if I couldn't locate one, then I would start researching a group of does, or maybe research a younger buck or something and kind of watch his behaviors. So
Is there anything from, and I'm sure there's a lot of different things. I want to talk about some kind of the nuts and bolts and the nitty gritty about wind, thermals, trail cameras, all that sort of stuff. But is there anything from a mature buck perspective, a behavior that you observed that really kind of surprised you just right off the top?
yeah, I have two. One would be their ability whenever thermals switch, their ability to stand up within that time frame. I mean, within like a 10-minute before or after time frame, which for them they're probably standing up right about whenever thermal switch. And whenever I say thermal switch, that doesn't mean that thermals are kind of rising throughout the day because the sun's hitting wherever they're bedding, and then sun's down a little bit more, and now the thermals are straight down and everything's falling. Which technically the terminology that thermals are dropping is incorrect, but I'm not going to talk about that at the moment. That's a future video, and
Yep.
that's going to be a continued thing that's sarcastic going into the future for all of my videos and every podcast I do. I'll continue mentioning thermals, and then I'm also going to continue to mention that I will have a video on thermals someday in the future, but
Yeah.
it's going to take a second, and just keep waiting on me for that, because I just want to make sure that graphically it's at the level that I need it to be, so it can be as clear as possible. But anyways, whenever thermals are switching, it's not just like a up and then a down situation. There's a lot of swirling that happens in that time frame. For it can happen for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and at that moment they kind of enter a state of major advantage. And I think that that's why whenever the thermals are switching, potentially they're standing up in that time frame. And whenever they're standing, it's not as if they're just popping up and immediately leaving. A lot of times they stand and they kind of clean themselves and browse around in their bedding area for 10 to 15 to 20 minutes. And then they finally kind of mosey off in the direction that they're wanting to head in. And then the other thing that I noticed would be, it kind of happens more often in the morning than in the evening, but is their efficiency for their route of travel that they're trying to take, and how efficient that they are along that trek. And that doesn't just mean how efficient they are in terms of where they're walking. And if you wanted to go from point A to point B, and you were a human, what would be the cleanest route that you could possibly take with the least elevation change? So that way you're putting the least amount of wear and tear on your body. Not as much that as their efficiency and their ability to cross section travel routes that does had previously walked in. So they're not walking on doe trails very often, and kind of hitting those areas a lot. And instead, they're hitting them at a cross section, and they're intersecting them all the way throughout. And it was not uncommon to see a mature buck intersect at least 30 to 35 does on a single morning movement. And these 30 to 35 does, they could be in groups of 3 does, they could be in groups of 8 does, but he's intersecting in their trail. And then I could see on thermal where, all of a sudden he's standing, 30 to 50 yards away from this little group of does, and he's scent checking the ground that entire time. And he's scent checking, obviously, their scent glands that are in their feet. And then he'll kind of pop his head up and check them out for a second visually, and then he'll scent check the ground a little bit more. And then all of a sudden he'll turn around and he'll just walk right back to where he was prior and right back onto his trail, and he'll continue his trek. And he'll do that a couple times throughout his morning trek, where he'll intersect something that became slightly interesting to him, whether he thought that maybe she might be an estrus or whatever it is. And he'll kind of hook off of his main trail and walk back over towards this group of does, and then he'll just spin back around right back onto his trail and continue walking that section.
That's very interesting. I mean,
yeah.
So did you see it with thermals? And I guess mature bucks, you kind of hear different things on, shrinking core area, those sort of things. Do you see a lot of stuff with thermals where mature bucks basically, let's say, wind thermal switches, and they just stand up and bed differently, bed in a different direction, orient themselves in bed in, just different beds, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I've seen the wind shifting side of things pretty consistently in the middle of the day. So if you have a kind of a south wind shifting around to a north wind, then oftentimes they will get up and do something. That doesn't mean that they're going to get up and move, 500 to 800 yards and readjust their bedding location. But I've seen them just do something as simple as stand up and then cross a drainage and then bed right on the other side of that drainage. So in total, they may have moved 30 to 50 yards and they just bedded back down. And but I have seen where they've moved 500 to 800 yards and just completely relocated themselves in the demographic of the property and reposition themselves and then bed back down for 2 to 3 hours. And just a massive wind shift type situation. But I find it interesting because whenever a lot of people ask me about wind direction and deer moving with wind direction, potentially with
Hmm.
it in their face or with it crosswind or from a tailwind, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I think that almost everything they do, barring winds being stronger than like 8 to 10 miles per hour, if you have a wind that can kind of overpower thermals potentially, then I think wind direction starts playing a much more critical role. But if they're a little bit slower and stable, then from what I've seen, I think everything's thermal driven. I think has to tie into with what the thermals are doing in those particular areas. And if it's kind of in the wintertime, then you're going to have the sun beating down on those south facing slopes, and it rises in the east, of course, and rises in the east. But you're going to have the sun beating down the south facing slopes, and the north slopes are going to be shaded. So those areas are going to have everything falling still, while the north slopes are going to begin rising. And that plays a much larger role than just wind direction.
It's interesting because thermals might be a more reliable, I guess they're maybe more reliable, maybe more predictable based on topography and, sun rising, sun setting, those sort of things. But especially in like the mountain stuff, I guess selfishly that we hunt, the winds are so variable. Like
Mm-hmm.
they hit you in the face, then they're coming from the side and they hit you in the back. And you're like, God, how do I play this? Like, how is a buck? How's he interpreting this? If he's in a bed, he's freaking just spinning like a top, And
Yeah.
that makes sense though. You saying the thermal thing, because like, I guess he would start to understand how in different temperatures and ranges and
Yeah.
topography those thermals hit him, and then he kind of creates a path on how he navigates the landscape based on that, instead of like, well, the wind is light and variable.
Yeah. Yeah, like I had one section that just looking at it from topography, you can tell that it's a thermal hub. And there's one little section off of the just kind of the very bottom of this ridge where I could consistently find not the same mature buck, but I could consistently find a mature buck utilizing this bedding area almost every single day throughout the middle of the day. And I haven't done it yet, but I'd really like to just go sit down there and just come season, just go sit down there and experience what that area is like and what exactly it's doing throughout the day that makes them enjoy that location so much.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is brought to you by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. I used to be that guy lugging heavy gear down a steep hill after a big buck and regretting it with every single step. But now I use lightweight and dependable gear from Out on a Limb Manufacturing, and it has made a huge difference in my hunting and allows me to get to those hard to reach places. I do a lot of saddle hunting on public land throughout the fall, and a lot of those walks are 1 to 2 miles deep into the mountains. And in those situations, extra weight is not your friend. There's nothing better than walking through the woods and being able to get in any tree that you want. I've been running the Shakar sticks for a long time now, and the Ridge Runner 2.0 platform, and this past year I tried the Flatlander saddle from Out on a Limb as well, and all of that gear is extremely lightweight and comfortable. If you want to support a 100% made in America company, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA15 for 15% off at checkout. Once again, that is code HNTA15 for 15% off at outonalimbmfg.com. We trust Out on a Limb products for run and gun hunting anywhere in the country, and we hope that you will too. So explain that a little bit, like, because thermals, I feel like, are they're a topic that I guess can seem kind of overwhelming, and I think in some sense, some people have coined terms that make them more complicated than they probably are, in a way to differentiate how smart someone is. They make up code words or different things, and so like at a pretty basic level, can you explain thermals in kind of how they navigate the landscape to someone who's like maybe hunting in a little bit more mountainous terrain, like you were researching?
Yeah, and I actually that's what I was saying earlier is I won't dive crazy deep into thermals just because I do have a massive video that's going to be
Sure.
coming out talking about that, but I can explain the basics of it. But the Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions in how thermals are interpreted from a hunter's perspective and not from like a meteorology perspective. So like
Hmm.
not actually understanding the true science behind why a thermal rises and how what exactly is taking place in that time. And I think that if it could be explained from a scientific perspective and then reanalyzed from a hunter's perspective,
Yeah.
because we just throw around terminology thermals really bluntly, like thermals rising, thermals falling. That's kind of the joke that I'd said earlier with thermals don't really fall. The only thing thermals do, a thermal is a rising heat. So and
Hmm.
that's thermal. Period. There's like nothing else really to do with thermals. So thermals don't fall. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that particular right now. But like in the situation with a thermal hub, the reason they're so advantageous for a mature buck or for any deer for that matter. That's why you find significant amount of deer sign down in particular thermal hubs. It's just ridges and drainages all kind of falling into this one particular area, and it doesn't have to be like if you just Google thermal hub, a lot of them you're going to see where there's multiple ridges and drainages falling down into one area, and then it creates this kind of like a bowl system at the bottom where it's catching all of those thermals. And I'm gonna say it because it's just what hunters say, but all of those thermals falling down into the bottom, and that doesn't that's not particularly all the thermal like all that there is to a thermal hub. You can find micro topographical features that are technically thermal hubs where you only have one or two ridges and maybe a few little drainages in that area, and the topographical features are maybe only 50 feet on topo. But whenever you get in there in field, you can start to realize that all of these terrain features and the way that they kind of dive themselves in, it allows that scent to kind of roll back down into the bottom and get collected and swirled down and down at the bottom. And it allows for a mature buck to bed down kind of off of that lower third and retain all of the scent from all around him and that type of micro topographical feature. So
Yeah, that's a good explanation. Um, Another one that I wanted to dig into with you is obviously you talked about trail cameras in one of your videos recently, and trail cameras grab a very small picture of what's happening actually on the landscape, and then being able to kind of juxtapose that with the drone on what's actually happening from a wider view. Is there anything on the trail camera side that surprised you or stood out to you that you think's relevant for deer hunters?
yeah, I think from the trail cam research that I'd done, I went into it kind of knowing that it was going to be pretty similar as to what I walked away with from a data standpoint. But essentially, trail cameras just they're not capturing near as much as you think that they are. And in a situation like it was not uncommon to see 20 to 30 deer walking past a camera in this just massive conglomerate of a group. Because last year we had a massive acorn crop. So by putting those cameras in the timber versus out kind of on the edges of the food plot, it was actually upping my odds dramatically to get trail cam pictures because there were a ton of deer moving throughout this heavy wooded section. And there were a few shots that I had where there were almost 30 deer all moving past this camera. And then we'd check the phone for a notification and we'd get a picture of like three or four deer in one image, and that was about it. And it's like, okay, well, if you were hunting in that situation and you were off at the edge of the bluff and you had your wind getting blown off of it, whatever, and you saw those almost 30 deer in that typical situation, then you would have walked home and kind of told your wife or told your friends or something like, dude, I just saw 30 deer the other day. Like that was a really good, that was a pretty good hunt. You didn't get a shot on anything, there wasn't a mature buck in the group or anything, but in the end, like, you saw a tremendous amount of deer and it was really a lot of fun. But from a trail cam perspective, you view that picture of 2 to 3 deer and it's like, man, it must be pretty dead out there today. Like
Yeah.
deer aren't moving that much today. And it's like, no, they were up and they're almost always up and moving. They have to be doing something. There are weather conditions that can keep them down for longer, like if it's just ridiculously hot for that particular time of the year. But no, I mean, they have to move. They have to do something. They have to go out and eat food. They have to go out and get water and survive essentially. So the woods are never fully dead. They can seem more dead at times from a hunter's perspective. And maybe sometimes you go into an area and you accidentally bump deer without knowing it. And then that makes your particular area that you're hunting a little bit more dead on that day. But the woods are rarely ever dead from the perspective that people think. And really my biggest problem going into the trail cam study that I had was just that, getting a picture of something and not taking it for what it is, but really letting it affect you emotionally as a hunter and viewing that picture is like that's the clearest picture for you in your brain as to what's taking place out in the woods right now. So you got a picture of 2 to 3 deer. Woods must be dead today. It probably wasn't that good of a day to go hunting anyways. Yet, the biggest deer on the property walked 50 yards past the camera off to the right hand section, and he's been doing it for the last 3 days in a row, and you had no idea that entire time frame. So basically, if you're getting trail camera pictures and you receive a trail cam picture of a big mature buck or a target buck, something that you're wanting to hunt after, then take it for what it is, and the fact that like he's out there, he moves through that area, and that's about all of the intel that you should be walking away with. That if you're running a ton of cameras on a small property, and you can kind of maybe like say you've got 50 cameras on that 20-acre section that I was running, then yeah, you're probably going to get a lot more pictures of him and maybe be able to piece together a situation. I think that it's a little more unhealthy and not as financially capable. Or I'm not financially able to do that. So,
Yeah.
in my opinion, I think it'd be a lot more fun if you could run less cameras. And getting pictures of deer is cool, and getting a picture of the mature buck, especially in hill country, like if you're in a early season scouting situation, going out and finding a mature buck in hill country is pretty tough with big mature timber. Just walking up on one and bumping him, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So running a trail camera in that setting and getting a picture of him is not a bad idea. But to try to use that picture, that snapshot in time, to base your entire hunting efforts off of, I don't recommend. I recommend take it for what it is. He's out there somewhere, and then now analyze the property that you're hunting and figure out the best locations to be sitting in based off of that, and go out and put boots on the ground, look for deer sign, look for these types of maybe travel corridors that you're missing on topo, and really try to piece together the whole story, versus just sitting at home and analyzing trail camera pictures and being like, well, I got a picture of him here and I got a picture of him here, so I think he's got to be kind of making some type of trek in this type of situation. I don't know. And a lot of times people let it control their emotions too much, and the fact that you wake up in the morning and you don't get a trail cam picture of your Mr. Big Deer, and maybe he's only nocturnal in that setting, and you go to sleep and you're looking forward to get a picture of him in the morning, and you didn't. It's like, well, where'd he go? Where's he at? Why did I not see him? And it's like, well, he's still out there, probably. Maybe he's not on your property that day, but like he's still out there, unless someone killed him, of course. But or unless he died from EHD. But like let's paint the picture in your idea that he's probably still out there, and just go out in the woods and stink and hunt. That's kind of my take on it. So
Yeah, I think that's a good message. Because it's been funny I have a couple shared leases, and so there's places where a good buddy of mine will be hunting, and then kind of I'll just be observing back, from a trail camera perspective. And I've got calls after hunts before where I get 6 or 7 pictures in the morning. Maybe there's a buck or a few does. I'm like, man, yeah, there's some activity. Like, and you can kind of see my buddy up in the tree in the background. You're like, oh, he's seeing some deer. And you get a call at 10 a.m. It's like, dude, saw 7 bucks, 15 does this morning. I'm like, I saw 3 does and a couple bucks on the trail camera. Like, and he's like, no, dude, this is the best morning ever,
Yeah.
And so I've seen it that way. And then, it is one of those things where I think trail cameras save a lot of mature bucks, because they're either not walking in front of it, or even other variables like the picture delay. A doe walks in front of the camera, clicks, and 30 more seconds you wait, and then the buck walks by her in that time frame. And it's a very small piece of the puzzle. And then I think people try to take that small piece of the puzzle and add 5-10 more trail cameras, and being like, well, I'm gonna know exactly, he comes down this path, I'm gonna get him 3 different times, and there's no way that I'm gonna miss him. And it's just, I don't know, it's an over analyzing a situation, when in reality, I think a trail cam picture is just to verify that a deer exists. Oh, deer's still alive, he's in my area, awesome, I'm gonna hunt him. Now I gotta know I got a shot.
Yeah, exactly. And now just try to figure out how to hunt him based off of all those other variables that you've pieced together from in-person scouting and from analyzing topography, not off the fact that you got a picture.
So with your research, is there anything that you learned on the trail camera side that would help you with placement on trail cameras? Like, would you place them in different areas based on knowing how deer kind of navigate the landscape a little bit better?
Yeah, and actually for that study, it's one thing that I hadn't mentioned yet, is that for the study, I was trying to enter it from the mindset of like a really basic, just kind of standard run of the mill. I go out and hunt, and I'm just going to go out and hang these cameras. So I walked around and I found, which I kind of knew from the drone, but I found these areas where deer really like to, in particular, really heavy kind of doe trails type situations. And I was putting them over these really heavy trails that you could just pick out in the leaves whenever you're walking out in the woods. Something that if a guy was to walk onto public or something and try to analyze a property, it's like, okay, deer are using this trail right here. I'm going to put a trail camera right up here. So, and then
Hmm.
versus setting that camera, 10 foot in the tree, aiming back down over a scrape, I was putting it at kind of like chest to stomach high, facing, right about deer head height, like what a lot of people do. And I was just trying to mimic just a basic level type of hunter situation. And if I wanted to be a little more advanced in it, yeah, you can get to where you go and you find a fresh scrape or a community scrape, and then hang that thing 10, 15 foot in the air and have it aiming back down in that direction. And that can be more effective if you're wanting to locate in particular bucks in that scenario. Or for me, what I'd like to do, and what I like to recommend, is if you can find those funnels, and I've already started kind of coining the term invisible funnels, and being able to map topography and then also go out and find these types of terrain features that force deer into just a funnel in the end. But find really, really tight funnels that deer have to travel, like less than 30 yards wide, and then setting trail cameras up in those types of areas. And that, I think that'll be a lot more educational from a hunter's perspective, to know, one, whether or not any deer go up and down that particular funnel. Because if deer are moving up and down it, then it's, if you're only getting pictures of does, and every once in a while you get a picture of a buck on this type of little tight topographical feature, he's probably moving through it a lot more than often, a lot more than you're getting. And that might be a really good location to go and set up on, because he's being forced to travel in such a tight area. And not a lot of properties, I mean, you start getting to ag settings and whatnot, they're not going to have those types of topographical features. But if you do, and you're kind of in hill country, or maybe a little bit semi mountainous and whatnot, then yeah, mapping all of those areas off that are truly impassable to where they have to pass through, and then placing trail cameras in those areas, that can be a little bit more advantageous. But even then, I would still just take it for what it is in terms of the picture, the for the fact that, yeah, he exists, period. Like that's kind of all you really need to know.
It puts it in perspective too, because if you're putting a trail camera in a place that doesn't have like a super tight funnel and you're getting a picture of a buck, let's just say 3 out of 7 days, it's like, well, how many days did he walk 5 yards to the left? If I got him 3 out of the last 7 on a
Yeah.
spot that he could have walked 40 yards wide, 50 yards wide, it's like, dude, he's in here a lot, you
Yeah.
know, a
Yeah,
lot. So you
yeah,
can
he's
put that
probably
in
in there.
perspective.
Yeah, yeah, a lot more if you're getting that many pictures of one buck. Which, yeah, I mean, maybe in that scenario you could try to utilize it to your advantage, and like, okay, he's fresh in there every single day, daylighting 3 to 7, 3 out of the 7 days on camera. Yeah, probably go find a way to get in the woods. But even then, I don't know that I would go and hunt right over that trail camera, just because he's moving right in that particular area 3 out of the 7 days. I would try to hunt in an area where I can gain entry and exit really well. Well,
Hmm.
it just kind of depends. If you have an area, um, I don't really publicize this term on like YouTube and whatnot, but kind of a suicide stand, where you can just go in, and like there's a 100% chance that you're going to bump deer whenever you exit. But if you can gain entry without being detected, and then hunt it, and even in some scenarios you might have to bump like a younger doe, or some younger bucks and whatnot, and you can get
Yeah.
into this deep location that's just like extremely valuable and really high odd mature buck situation, but you're gonna bump deer. I think those are really good types of strategies to use as well. And you could potentially, if you did have a buck daylighting 3 out of 7 times in a in a terrain feature like what you just mentioned, then yeah, maybe treating it like a suicide stand situation would be a good idea. I don't think a lot of times people are getting, daylighting pictures 3 out of 7 days of a buck in a
Yeah.
wide terrain feature like that. But if you are, then yeah, by all means, like full send that situation.
Yeah. We call those risk it for the biscuit stands
I'll
because
probably change my term to that then. Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
No, because it's like you get a if you're getting pictures of deer, deer are in there. Like I can think of one that I have this. It's just a big bowl, and it has a creek on one side that like basically funnels a bunch of movement, and it's just a giant oak flat. I guess not flat, but it's just giant sea of oaks in this bowl, and they all come together. And it's like, no, I'm gonna bump 3 or 4 deer on my way in there. Usually
Yeah.
fawns and does, but it's like if I can get them to run in the right direction and not blow for 30 minutes, I'm going to see some deer. But it's not the type of spot that you're going to hunt for a week because you're like, after
Yeah.
I do this 2, 3 times, like the deer are like, yeah, no, I'm rolling out. But
Yeah.
it is one of those spots that you can kind of roll a dice and you're like, first, second sit, I might be able to pull something out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, and you actually saying that, like going in and intentionally bumping deer is not always the worst thing in the world, but it just depends on what deer you're bumping. Um, and that kind of goes into the little bit of the doe research that I've done, and also just things that I've seen and observed as a bow hunter. And a lot of people have probably seen this type of stuff, but still worth mentioning in the mindset that, like, if you have a group of does, a lot of times they kind of have like a king pen leader doe that's like the main mature doe, and she's just honestly kind
Needs
of
to
a
be
prick.
shot is what she
Yeah,
needs to
she
be.
needs to
Yeah.
be. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
an absolute jerk. Probably the smartest deer in the woods.
Yeah.
And if that group of does walk out, say, and a younger doe out of the group, she kind of spurs off and she just moves right downwind of you to where thermals and everything's just falling right to her, and she picks up your scent. But it's a younger doe, not the kingpin leader. She picks up your scent. She starts getting a little bit worried and kind of flags her tail, and she's bobbing her head and trying to get something to move and whatnot. A lot of times, the other groups of does, they'll put a little bit of stock into it, but after she bumps and kind of runs away from you, and she could even potentially blow. In a lot of scenarios, most of the other deer around that area, they're not putting a lot of stock into what that particular deer had just seen and what they just experienced. But if kingpin leader Mrs. Jerkface decides that she's going to get involved in this situation, and or maybe she's the one that catches your wind in the first place, and then she flags her tail and she starts kind of bobbing her head and trying to check out what's going on, then whenever she runs away and she lets everybody know that there's an issue, not only does that doe group acknowledge that, but every other deer in the woods is going to acknowledge anything that's remotely close by that can tell that, old Susan over here just picked up something and that she didn't like, don't go into that area right now. It's kind of a red box. And
Hmm.
same thing goes for like a younger group of bucks. If you have a young buck that kind of flags his tail and runs away, I see this a lot with like agriculture properties where you just have so many deer in an area, and say a younger buck gets your scent and then he's flagging his tail and he runs and he blows and he's madder than all get out, then all 50 to 70 plus deer, in the rest of the soybeans or something, they'll just kind of lift their head, look over, and be like, oh, whatever. Yeah, like he probably saw a raccoon or something. Not a big deal. But if the big dominant mature buck catches your scent and he blows out of the field, every other deer blows out of the field every single time, without a doubt. So yeah, in terms of going in and bumping deer, if you're bumping younger deer or you're bumping kind of younger does in that type of situation, a lot of times it's not going to have a dramatic effect on deer movement around you. And in most cases, those younger deer will probably move past you again. So
Yeah. It's really interesting. I've had 3 or 4 day hunts for one of those Karens or the big matriarchs that like I call them like, I mean, there are problem does where like, hey, this doe's onto me. She knows this tree stand location. She knows my access route. She'll sit in the timber and just blow at me just for the heck of it.
yeah,
I try to shoot those deer so fast. I mean, I'll hunt. I'll give up my mature buck hunt. I'm like, because like she has to be taken off of this
yeah,
landscape because she sits there and educates every one of the other deer. Like, no, when you come in, look right up there,
yeah.
and walk over here, and you'll be able to catch them on this wind. They're really really smart animals, man.
Yeah, I remember one time I took my wife rifle hunting for the first time. I guess she wasn't my wife at the point. She was my girlfriend, but we went up and sat in a tower and we were just going to shoot one of the first does that walks out so she could kind of get her bearings. But where I had taken her, I knew that I had one of those does, kind of a Karen, and I had warned her about it. I said that she's going to walk out on this part of the field on that far corner about 120 yards away, and she's just going to poke her head out. And in that scenario, you're going to be able to pick out her front shoulder and kill her, but you're going to have to keep the gun in the window, and we're just going to wait. She will be the first doe that walks in the field, by the way. It's like this is so I laid out all the groundwork on how we're going to kill this deer. She had the gun in the window, everything. And I also warned her that whenever she leans her head out of the field, first thing she's going to do is she's going to look right at the tower. She's going to look right at the opening window and see if there's any movement or a silhouette or anything. So I'd got a backdrop and everything, so that way break our silhouette a little bit more. I think I may even put some stuff in the window to kind of like cut up the front of us a little bit. And all of a sudden, 30 minutes had passed and Kinsey had kind of looked over in that direction. She saw the doe and she kind of jerked a little bit around for her gun. And I was like, why did you just move? And she was like, well, I'm going to get on the gun. And I'm like, well, you better get on her fast because she's about to leave. And not 2 seconds into it, that doe just turned and she just blew all the way down through the woods. And it's like, man, you should have been ready. Like that was the snake. But she didn't kill one that day. So I took her to a much easier spot. We killed a younger doe the next day. But yeah.
Oh, I love those ones. Yep. Yeah, I love those ones. I've seen some does like that too that do that, and like saggiest brisket, saggiest skin. I'm like, this
Yeah,
deer's like freaking 6, 7 years old. Like she's educated
yeah.
every one of these deer out here to what's going on. Like you said, first one in the field, like
Hmm.
chachiest attitude out of all of them. Like been there, done that. You know how many deer she's probably seen shot right next to her. I'm like, you're lucky
Yeah.
you're a doe, or you'd be like the most prized mature buck out here.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about invisible funnels earlier.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that terrain feature, maybe how to identify it and then how mature bucks use it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in the end, an invisible funnel, what I'm calling them, it's just technically a funnel. But it's instead of just looking at topographical features in terms of contour lines and trying to piece together, uh, those types of funnels that are very, very obvious, or maybe finding a wood edge up against a field where it thins out and it becomes really narrow, and you think maybe a mature buck that wants to wrap this field, he's got to walk through that thin wood edge. This is more trying to find topographical features where deer absolutely cannot, under any circumstance, move up or down it. So in my particular area of hill country, we have a lot of these just like little spurs of 5 foot to 8 foot cliffs all over the place, and no white-tailed deer is ever going to move up and down one of those. So they almost always have to wrap it. And trying to identify it, but you can't see them on contour lines, right? So there's features like Terrain X, and then there's all sorts of different lidar technology that exists now, where you can go
Hmm.
out, and you can potentially ID these cliff locations. But even if you mark them on a map from topo, I would highly recommend still going in person if you're able to, and verifying those areas. And maybe that cliff runs an extra 20 foot down from what topography shows, and you need to go ahead and mark that off as well. And then also, while you're in field, just marking off areas where I see it most with drainages, from kind of heavy flooding and areas that hadn't been cleaned out well, where big mature timber and everything had been pushed and knocked over, and kind of blocks off an entire drainage system. And it makes it to where no deer is going to be able to walk up and down that system. So go ahead and mark all of that off as well whenever you're in field, and just trying to mark off as many different variables throughout this short block of time that you can do scouting, and where deer cannot travel, absolutely cannot travel. And then in the end, you can kind of zoom out and look at your picture, and it's like, well, deer are forced to walk and sometimes they're forced to walk in an area that's 30 yards wide. Sometimes they're forced to walk in an area that's like 120 yards wide. But in the end, if you're able to narrow that down to where they're, and, we're not trying to find the tightest funnels in the world. I'm just trying to see where deer have to walk. So you're trying to narrow that down. And if you can narrow it down to a 120-yard wide funnel, and you can go and hunt that section potentially, and then maybe start narrowing down where deer travel within that 120-yard wide span, and getting yourself closer and closer and closer over time. But trying to hunt initially in an area where you're going to be undetected, so that way you can observe deer and how they move through that area, and then just getting closer and closer over time to where they actually move and utilize the terrain in that particular spot.
You're looking at it from a topographical perspective, and then verifying with your eyes places where topography and terrain limit movement. Like
Yeah.
absolutely, like no, they can go left or right. They're not going through, or they're not
Yeah,
going up
yeah,
this
they
because of
yeah,
this
they
reason.
absolutely cannot go through it. And you can also mark areas, sometimes there's a crazy steep grade of terrain where you could probably look at it and be like, I could scramble up that. And if you feel like you could scramble up it, a deer can scramble up it as well. They can climb it, 50 times faster than we can. So, but a lot of times, if you find those areas, unless that's all that exists, if that's all that exists, then they're probably going to have to find a way to walk up and down it. Or in those types of really steep grades, you're going to find an area where there's like a 1 to 2 foot wide bench kind of cut out in it, where all of the deer kind of travel through it. So if you can find those areas, then that's really cool. But oftentimes there's more terrain features than just crazy steep grades that are traversable. So whenever I find those types of areas that are just really, really steep, and it would take kind of a little bit of a scramble for me to climb, I'll mark them as probably impassable, and like not too likely to see deer travel in this area. But if you bump one, they can obviously bounce up it as quick as they, or if you're hunting on top of that ridge system, and mature buck catches your wind, he can bounce down off of that steep grade just as fast as anything. But in terms of utilizing it from a day by day basis, they're not going to do it too often, from what I've seen.
That does make sense. One of the things that I wanted to go back to that you touched on a little bit earlier was obviously. Do you believe there's buck versus doe trails? Do you believe that mature bucks use kind of carve different paths for themselves to be maybe less noticeable for a hunter on the landscape
Yeah.
than
Yeah,
does?
I wouldn't say that the idea is that it's less noticeable for hunters in the landscape. I think it's just more efficient that way for them. So every once in a while, you can find where a mature buck, say there's an area and it kind of restricts it down to where all the deer have to walk in this area. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
going to walk along that doe's that doe's trail as well. But in most cases, he's trying to hit intersecting trails. So it's not really that he's staying off of the doe's trail so that way he can avoid the hunter, or avoid a different predator or something.
sure.
He's just trying to be as efficient as he possibly can by intersecting trails and scent checking them all the way, all along the way. So, and that can be kind of like a semi diagonal or just a straight kind of 90 degree type situation where he's hitting it all the way across and just trying to hit as many of those trails as possible along a movement.
I'm just thinking about it from perspective of like his trail may not be nearly as defined. He's not doing it because he might not perceive that like, oh, well, all the deer are doing this, so I'm going to do something different. He's using it as like I'm checking wind. I'm being efficient with my time. I know if I go this route, I can hit X, Y, Z, A, B,
Yeah.
C, D along this path.
Yeah, I mean, he has a complete different set of goals in his mind than what a doe does, right? So a doe, they're just trying to, if they have a fawn potentially, but they're trying to kind of put on mass and go out and get food, water, retain shelter, and just not die. Whereas he has the whole different mindset kind of going where, especially whenever you get into, for my area, Missouri, kind of late October and then all the way into January, where he's trying to find every single receptive doe out there and potentially breed them. So his set of goals, he kind of lets, whereas in September and August and whatnot, he's trying to beef up for that time frame, and you'll find him active at food and water and stuff a lot more frequently. Whenever that rut time frame, pre-rut, and then all the way into the deep post rut kicks in, his set of goals has completely shifted, and he is going to try to intersect as many trails as he can. Every single, what I'm seeing more often than not in the morning time frame, except for peak rut. And peak rut, you can pretty much throw everything out the window that you know about deer. It's just wild. So if you can identify peak rut in your area, then yeah, just go find a way to be in the woods, and you'll possibly get lucky. That's kind of the best. And that's why we see most bucks killed during peak rut, is because a lot of people get extremely lucky in that time frame, and a lot of times states kind of prioritize rifle season around potentially what their peak rut is as well. So it gives people a greater weapon, and then it also puts them in the time frame where mature bucks are going to make the most amount of mistakes as possible. So yeah, no, during peak rut, it's like just go sit in the woods and try to get lucky. But outside of that, you kind of have to be a little bit more intelligent.
Hey guys, Jake Gaylord here. We just spent 8 days hunting Sitka blacktail here on Kodiak Island. And during the early season, you're gonna get a good mix of cold, wet, dry, and sunshine. And these pursuit pants with the Renegade quarter zip were the perfect combo. The main things I liked about the pursuit pants were the knee pads and the zippable pockets. The knee pads, great for spot stalking for obvious reasons, and the zippable pockets were really good for keeping whether your phone, your release, your in reach, something that you wanted to keep tight and secure. As for the Renegade quarter zip, it's super lightweight, super breathable. It keeps the sweat or moisture off of you, and it dries super easy. If you're looking for lightweight, durable gear for the early season, be sure to check out numaoutdoors.com.
Yeah, it's both encouraging and discouraging. If your spot normally sucks, you're like, awesome, it could happen. If your spot's great and now there's havoc, you're like, well, this sucks. I knew what was happening a few weeks ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I guess in that peak or in that pre-rut, that cruising time period, is there anything that you observed that you would kind of be able to speak to, and what mature bucks like on that cruising pattern, how they're using the landscape? Is it mainly checking doe bedding areas, checking trails that does are walking down, and like, what did you observe during that time period?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes it's kind of, well, I kind of spelled it out in that first video too, in terms of how on their morning movement, it seems more missional mindseted, where they're really, I think that a mature buck is intelligent enough that they have a predetermined idea as to what they're going to be doing throughout that morning movement. I don't know
Yeah.
how many hours ahead they're able to think of, but I think that they have an idea of where they're wanting to go. And I talked about this with somebody the other day in public, but it was that And well, deer aren't that intelligent because you can shoot a doe in a field and she can run to the field edge and she can die. And then another doe or another group of does can come into the field and they see that Karen is dead and it's like, oh well, there she goes, and then they
Hmm.
just kind of walk in and they browse around. But I, yeah, and that's a sign of them not being too intelligent, obviously. But from what I've seen with mature bucks, I think that they're able to kind of discern where they're wanting to go earlier on, and just kind of have a little bit of a picture in their mind of where they're wanting to travel. And in that morning time frame, they're traveling these long, semi-straight trails, and it's all dictated by terrain that all along the way, especially in hill country at least. And along that route, though, they're intersecting as many doe trails as possible, and then they're hitting rubs and scrapes pretty consistently. I've noticed that the the scrape frequency actually appears at a higher rate towards the end of their travel, wherever they're going. So wherever they end up in the end, it almost seems as if they hit like 2 to 3 to 4 scrapes, kind of wrapping a field edge potentially, or just off of a field edge, maybe kind of wrapping around a pond bank type situation. But it's almost as if kind of towards the end of that travel pattern, they tend to hit scrapes more frequently, and then they'll kind of move down off of the ridge a little bit and bed back down for the rest of the day. And kind of in the evening time frame, excluding peak rut, and this also kind of goes into a little bit more individualistic behavior. Some deer I'd
Hmm.
seen, they're just wild from the start of rut all the way until the end, all the way into January. They're wild all day, every single day. They're always trying to find does. And then some deer, you'll find them where whenever it comes into the evening time frame, they're just chill. They're just hanging out. It's like, all right, like I'm gonna go get food. I'm gonna go get water. I'm gonna kind of hang in the staging area and just kind of mosey around. There's really no, in terms of total yards traveled, it's probably pretty similar. I think that I'd had it in that first video that it is really similar in terms of total yards traveled, but net displacement, from basically where they're located from the time they're bedded to the end of that movement time frame, um, is drastically larger in the morning time frame than in the evening. In the evening, it's they're spending a lot of time just walking in circles and kind of left and right and back up to a staging area and maybe bedding down in the staging area and then getting up out of the staging area and kind of interacting with other deer around them. And it just seems a lot more lackadaisical and just kind of like comfortable for them. Whereas in the morning, they just seem like they're on edge all the time. It's like they've got places to be. Like we're trying to go and do something at this time frame. So
I mean, that would make sense to me. It's like coldest time of the day in the morning. You're probably rested. You're rejuvenated. I mean, they wake up just with like piss and vinegar, about to go mess something up,
yeah,
and throughout the day, they're like energy bars lower. Like, all right, unless something hot and estrus runs right in front of me, I'm probably gonna take it easy, recoup a little bit, and then hit it hard again
yeah.
in the morning. It's like a guy grabbing his helmet and going to his 9 to 5. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why it's easier actually to hunt mature bucks in the morning than it is in the evening. Because in the evening, if they're going to be hanging around staging areas and kind of semi close to feeding areas and whatnot, and also just kind of walking back and forth in these tight little areas, then they're around a lot more deer than if they're in the morning and they're traveling these long semi-state straight trails. Then in trying to intersect doe trails all along the way, they're not near. They're in fact most of the time they're traveling alone. So they're on their own, and you can potentially pick them off while they're on their own and making a travel route on their and individualistic. And in the evening, you're competing with like 15, 10, 30 noses and sets of eyes, all trying to find you. And also you have to be able to gain entry and exit in those types of locations, whereas if you're trying to pick off one deer on a travel route, then it's a lot easier, and he's a lot more likely to make a mistake because in those scenarios, I'm finding them travel. It doesn't really, there's not much of a depiction whether it's walking into a headwind or a crosswind or a tailwind. And like I said, I think thermals play into that role a lot more than not, and I think that allows the hunter to be a little bit more advantageous.
Yeah. Is there anything you learned from your thermal drone research about bedding area size of like typically? I know it's probably individualistic. It's probably unique to
Yeah.
most deer, but do you have a general sense of like what a mature buck is, apart from the rut, is going to have as a core area?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's completely individualistic. But I've seen deer kind of have a home range of all the way down to 80 acres, and then some deer have a home range like well into like well over 1,000 acres, kind of 1,200, 1,500 type acres. But in terms of bedding areas, whenever they make a bed, like say the deer that lived on 80 acres, he had 3 locations that he really tended to enjoy. And a lot of times the bedding areas were kind of like 50-yard to 100-yard circles. And it wasn't as if he was going in and utilizing that same exact bed every single time. He was just going back into that same bedding area in general and bedding back down. And he kind of, it didn't seem, I wasn't able to piece together a rhyme or reason as to why he would choose one over the other just yet. I just don't think I have enough data on it. But maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I noticed one he used on heavy inclement weather, kind of over the other ones potentially. I don't know if that, I say that, but I've also recorded a deer bedding on the north side of a ridge with 25-mile-per-hour north winds. So he's on the windward side of the ridge, and there was spitting ice, and it was 5 degrees. And he's just bedding there with his face into the wind. And it's like,
Just
well, that
eating
goes,
it.
yeah, just eating it. It's like that goes against everything with inclement weather, and you're also on the windward side of the ridge, and like he's going against every single thought process that we've ever had. So it was pretty fun to watch him do that. But I had seen that multiple times where deer just kind of bed in an area where it makes absolutely no sense. But yeah, in terms of like actual bedding areas, a lot of times it's like 50 to 100 yards of a circle, and they just kind of utilize that whole area as a bedding location. They're not really utilizing that same exact bed.
Yeah, that does make sense. I've seen some of the GPS collar study stuff, and you hear a lot of people talk about over and over again. This buck's bed or this buck beds here every time, and I think we've learned that maybe they do use some beds repetitively, but it's like they bed so sporadically, even within the same area. They're going back like, I'm going to hit 7 yards to the left of this, and then tomorrow I'm do a little different. It's kind of
I don't really know why. I have seen a couple deer utilize what I think, because I'm able to drop pins based off of where they're located, and then I upload all those pins as a .stl file into Onyx, and then I can kind of go and parse them together in there. And I have had one spot where multiple different bucks had bedded like right on top of this same pin. So I don't know if it was actually the same exact bedding area or not, but it wasn't crazy frequent. I think maybe 5 times different, maybe some of the same, and then some different bucks had utilized the same exact bedding location. So yeah, like you said, they can utilize the same exact bedding location technically, but ultimately it's going to be just kind of an area than an actual bed. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is it's really fascinating. Do you see, like, I guess, where do you see it going from here? Do you see like colleges, other research departments starting to implement this kind of technology to learn more about deer behavior, or like, where do you think it's gonna go?
Yeah, I mean, I think universities would like to. I've talked to some, and I don't think they'd mind me saying this, and the fact that the biggest problem with it is how expensive it is in order to get into it at a larger scale, and to allow someone to devote that much time to it. Because the difficulty with thermal drone research is you have to be there. With a GPS collar, you can spend a lot of time up front getting the collars on your deer, and then it's pretty much just like sit back and relax time
passive,
time frame. Yeah, it's just all passive, and they'd probably hate me for saying that, because there's probably a workload involved with it where if a GPS collar dies or all these types of situations where you have to go out and recapture the deer, so that way you can either put a new collar on or whatever. But ultimately the thermal drone research side of things is potentially in the end a lot more of a workload. It's definitely a lot more of a time commitment, and that's the biggest issue in terms of being able to implement it. So but I think I do have some things maybe in the works with some universities and some other groups where I'll be able to kind of push the thermal drone research, and maybe even involve it with GPS collars someday, and kind of get the best of both worlds on some stuff. But we'll see where that goes. I'd like to think that I could get something done in that regard, though.
Yeah, what are you looking at, like, from a time commitment standpoint? Were you literally just out there all day, every day, swapping batteries, following bucks? Like, is it that interesting to you, where you can devote that level of?
Yeah, I mean, I treated it like a full-time job. If I wasn't, then I don't think I was going to be able to make it as serious. So it was well over 40 hours a week type situation very oftentimes. And in terms of, I think that I just sent this to a guy the other day, and the total hours recorded for research purposes, it was like 21,020 hours or something, which if you do the math across that for like 40-hour weeks, for the 9 months that I was researching, it's like, well, that doesn't math out for 8 hours a day. But you have to realize that what I was putting into that for 21,000 ish hours was that was the amount of time that I spent actually researching deer. And there was a lot of work outside of that where I wasn't just flying the drone. That was true drone fly time whenever I was watching deer. There's also a lot of time that was spent where I was looking for a mature buck to research and I couldn't find one. So I just kind of had to fly around and keep flying. And there's also some scenarios where in the early season, if you had heavy, dense foliage and you'd fly up in the morning and you'd locate a deer and you would track him, whenever you'd come back to swap out batteries, then while swapping out batteries and 3-4 minutes surpass, you fly the drone back up and you go to relocate your deer, sun's beating down on all this heavy foliage and all the trees and rocks and soil, and everything's popping up as a hot thermal at that time frame, and it's really difficult to relocate the animal that you're tracking even with the ability to drop a pin on his last location. And there's some scenarios where I just flat out lost the deer. I couldn't find him anymore. So I kind of had to abandon ship for the rest of that day and try to fly around and maybe find deer bedding out a little bit more open terrain, and if I could track them. And if not, then it's like, well, I guess I'm gonna go offload all this video back at my house and come back in the evening. So yeah, no, I mean there were a lot of situations like that. And then there's some days that I just didn't fly. Like I didn't fly a ton of Saturdays. I didn't fly a lot of Sundays. In fact, that'd be probably the main day. And then there were some situations where I was sick. Maybe I had a kid that was sick. Maybe my wife was sick. It's like all these different things where, I kind of still had to live life and as if I had a full-time job and I took time off to kind of stay home type situation. But for the most part, yeah, I was trying to get out every single day and just fly the drone. So
yeah, man, I really respect the methodology and the commitment to it. It's really, really interesting. Obviously with drones, you have this whole kind of veil that's unveiled with, people could, like you just said, like you said in the beginning, buy one of these things, track a mature buck, find out what he does, and then ultimately implement it to kill him, which I feel like would take 99% of the fun out of it. But I guess
yeah,
that's,
I mean,
it's a possibility.
If you're going to be one of those guys and you're financially capable of going out and purchasing a $10,000+ drone and going out and tracking a deer, then I would highly recommend just spending your money to go and hunt high fence deer. That's kind of my push for you. If that's kind of your mentality on it and going out and killing a wild animal with a thermal drone, just go hunt high fence. So
yeah, is it illegal to do that? Can you do that?
To go out and fly a drone yeah, it's illegal. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
It's
I don't
especially
know.
illegal in my state. I know for a fact. So, but yeah, in terms of everything's a little gray area still, just because thermal drones are so new to this world. So more things are going to get pushed out, and for all I know, maybe they're going to get banned altogether for private land and public land use for flying and watching deer, which that's a concern for me in the long run. But people will misuse them. People will purchase them, and they are going to fly them, and I don't know that they're going to be flying them on public land because in most states, it's not even legal to just fly a drone up on public land. Any drone, that doesn't matter whether it's a $10,000 thermal drone. It could be your cheap little $300 drone. You can't just go out and start flying public land. You have to get a permit to be able to do so and contact them prior to doing it. And then they kind of have to know the dates and the time frames that you're going to be doing so on. So I would like to think that if you were following the law and you did get a permit to go fly your thermal drone on public land and it was hunting season, and then all of a sudden you tagged a deer within that same time frame that you were out flying a drone, but you have to assume that the type of person that would be wanting to do that wouldn't follow any of those rules. They're just going to go out and fly public land, and then they're going to kill a deer and probably not even tag it at that rate, honestly. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's going to be people that have the means though to misuse it, and I don't know where that goes. Thankfully, it's not my job to kind of all I can do is show the good that you can do with one of these things and just continue to push that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's awesome. Yeah, in a lot of states, it's a gray area. Like there's people that are using them for obviously tracking and recovering deer, and I'm like, is this legal? I don't know. Is it illegal?
Yeah.
I also don't know. But I guess it's on the enforcement side. But it's a cool piece of technology. I think if you can take things, and it's hard to generalize, but just learn little nuggets here and there, like you're putting out in your videos, I think it's extremely valuable. And there's definitely something that anybody can take away from it and learn just a little bit more about whitetail behavior that can maybe ultimately help them ditch technology in their own hunting experience and make it a little more wild. And then, learn a little more about woodsmanship and topography and features and how whitetails use the landscape and make it even more fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of ironic that that's the way that this is going, but by using like the ultimate form of technology to watch deer, by pushing people back in the other direction and being like, yeah, quit using technology as much, quit
Yeah,
relying. It doesn't
drop
mean
drop
that.
trail cameras.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to drop them completely. Like you can still have them for fun and whatnot, but ultimately, it's like just go out and have fun and actually go hunting and kind of bring that back a little bit more and teach people how to go out and scout and these types of things. So yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
fun.
it's cool from the debunking side of things because there's all these myths or like just things that are accepted as common knowledge because someone who has success says that they're that way or things are this way. And it's cool for me. I'm a very so I don't know if you know the Enneagram scale. I'm an Enneagram 8. So like I hear something and it happens, like someone says something is fact, and my immediate response is like, absolutely not. And it's like they could have a great and I just because I don't know.
Yeah,
Right. I'm like,
yeah,
it's hard to generalize. So I think it's cool. I think you're gonna, and I'm sure you have more research that you're gonna put out, but there's a lot of things that we're either gonna be able to affirm or maybe just add another different perspective into the pot. And I just think that's fun. I think it's fun stirring the pot. I think it's fun saying
yeah.
things that maybe people don't agree with. But if you have the research to back it up, dude, it's awesome. I enjoy
Yeah.
this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a lot of fun. So
Yeah. Well, where can people connect with you and check out your research or just stay connected with you throughout the fall as they're trying to consume some of this stuff?
yeah, yeah. My obviously the channel's name is Whitetail Research, and kind of my main staple right now is on YouTube. But I have an Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all the things. I kind of hate social media, so I haven't really posted a lot on all those at the moment. But
Mhm.
really, out of them, the thing that I'll probably start doing more than not is Instagram, and because I am a wildlife photographer, so I've got a lot of cool wildlife photography things that I'll probably start posting on the Instagram, and just kind of keeping people up to date with like what I'm semi doing in real life type situation. And so yeah, Instagram might be a pretty cool one to go and follow, especially if you're into kind of wildlife photography a little more. And then but yeah, all across the board, Whitetail Research, everything. I've got the name everywhere. I don't know how I got it. And then whitetailresearch.net, that's my website. And someday I'd like to start doing kind of a blog format thing. And I know most men, whenever they hear me say like this guy's going to do a blog, like what a guy, he's going to a blog. But
Yeah.
when I suggest a blog, I mean whenever I make a video and it's completely research based, like it's a true research video with a lot of data and statistics and things in it, then kind of making a college level style paper that kind of explains the entire research and what was involved with it and showing all of the statistics and showing all of the data that maybe got left out a little bit in the video because the videos are kind of fast paced, and just kind of giving another resource. Like if you want to deep dive and really get into it a little bit more, then you can go out and read this paper. And maybe only 20 or 30 or 40 people would do it, but it'd be cool if one person did it to me. So
Yeah, no, that's super valuable. Well,
yeah.
like I said, I admire what you're doing, man, and the integrity that you're doing it with, and I appreciate you kind of dropping some of your knowledge today.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me on.